Hi everyone, welcome to the next panel discussion. I'm Carla Hill from E3G. So we have the task to pick up from Nick Mabey's speech and pick up the mantle of why we still need to talk about climate action. We are going to, this afternoon, attempt to untangle some of the politics of net zero, and we are looking at the public versus the backlash, and really diving into that topic. The politics is rapidly shifting in the general world, not talking about climate, but climate action must be delivered in that context. So we are seeing fragmentation at the center, we're seeing increasing levels of populism, and in some instances, a shakiness around net zero, both in the mainstream politics and in the populist politics, in terms of zeroing in on net zero, the costs of the policies, and why are we doing this on our own? Others are not coming with us. So what I want to do is to start to sort of detangle and untangle that with the panel, but also pick up on the economic opportunity of good climate policy or smart climate policy, the responsibilities of institutions to protect the public, society, livelihoods, economies from the dangerous impacts of climate change. But how do we reconcile also the widespread popular support that is currently enjoyed in almost all parts of the world and across the political spectrum? How do we turn that into political action, but also how do we deliver on that demand in a way, given the turn in some areas by the political elite? I'm going to turn to my panel today to help us address this question. James Kanagasuriam from Focal Data is the Chief Research Officer, has just been conducting some work in the UK, updating some of the thinking around attitudes on net zero, on renewable energy, and on climate change. So we've got some new results for you today, and that very much bear out some of the polling across Europe and elsewhere. Next, I'll be turning to Carl Matheson, Senior Climate Correspondent from Politico Europe. Carl has worked across Europe also. He's based in London with Politico currently, and has focused for a number of years on Europe, European politics and policy, and the wider climate agenda. Finally, Stentje van Veldhoven from WR Europe, a former MP and Minister in the Netherlands. Stentje, welcome back to State of Climate Politics for the second year. And Stentje will give us some point of view from the practice. So James, I want to turn to you first. What are the key political narratives, the trends that you're seeing in terms of public opinion around climate action and net zero? We would love, with bated breath, to hear some more about the results of the work you've been doing. So over to you, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Carla, and great to be here today. Look, in terms of the news, as a pollster, I really have, my job is to basically articulate the voices and opinions of people who are not in the room. That's basically the job of a pollster, to get the opinions of people across different countries. Look, there's good news and there's bad news, and I'll run through it in that kind of order. In terms of the more challenging news, over the last 3 to 4 years, there has been what I would call a softening, basically, of fundamental support for climate action. So, the UK government's own tracker has seen a move from around 85% of people being very concerned about climate change to around 80%. YouGov, the international pollster, registers only 15% of the UK public registering climate change as the most important issue to them. That's down from around 31% back in October 2021. In the kind of preparation, I think, for COP26, we've seen a halving, basically, of support for salience. But actually, underneath the surface, there's a couple of challenges that are going on. For a start, the numbers of people who believe that there's now conflicting information about climate change is up 5%, from 47% to 52% in just 2 years. There is decreasing belief that everyone is doing their bit for tackling climate change and therefore people's ability to support it. So that's up 7% in just 3 years. But I think most concerningly, the numbers of people who believe via the media that climate change is exaggerated, or claims of it are, have gone from 30 to 33% in just 2 years. So these are all small movements, but I think underneath the surface there's a clear indication of the kind of softening. But kind of take a step back, which is that basically in the UK, according to our latest poll for E3G, 70% of the UK public, and this is, by the way, reflected in other countries as well, we poll internationally, 70% of the public agree with the statement that greenhouse gases are damaging the planet and we need to take urgent action to remedy this. Now, if you think about that, that's not just 70% of people who are broadly in favor of tackling climate change. That's the wording of the statement is about urgent action. And as a pollster, it's very rare that you get a supportive coalition really above 40, 50%. Think about political parties across the world who struggle to cobble together 25, 30, 40% coalitions, depending on the political structure that they are. The kind of pro-tackling climate action segment is one of the largest in UK in terms of public opinion. Yes, it's seen a softening. Yes, the underlying fundamentals have got worse, but fundamentally, 3/4 of the public, or nearly that, support some kind of action. And underneath the surface, look, why have things got tricky? What are the causes? Couple of potential reasons. We've seen a lot about the politics of deindustrialization. You can see that support for climate action has clearly declined in a lot of the places where we've seen a high degree of deindustrialization and lower levels of formal education. But actually, when we asked the UK public, what are the causes? High energy bills was the first, 44% of people. Second, cheap labor costs. And third, lack of government investment. But when we asked people, who do you blame for high energy bills? By far and away, in the UK's context, was reliance on imported energy, 54%. Excessive profits from the energy sector at 56%. Bad regulation at 46%. And it was really only 27% that blamed climate change policies for higher bills. And I think that's the point, which is that broadly, there has been a positive trend. There's been a softening in the last 3 years. But fundamentally, the challenge that's here is that in the UK and actually across a lot of Western countries, between 1 in 4 and 1 in 3 voters are now fairly hostile to tackling climate. And that matters because in an era of political fragmentation, 25 to 30% has gone from a losing vote share to a winning one. And there's a huge amount of political energy behind that. But I think the fundamental research does have a couple of suggestions for how that might be kind of tackled. The first is the research on climate action clearly shows that when it comes to trade-offs, the sector needs to do better. If it's constantly traded off against the cost of living and bills, and that is basically the choice that is given to voters, they will pick lower bills each time. And I think unpicking that trade-off is critical. The second, and I think clearly linked to geopolitical kind of instability, is that there is a clear sovereignty aspect and argument to be made here about reliance on imported energy. It may not be the first argument that people in this room would reach to, but it has massive cut-through into electorates and voters who would typically not be in your camp. But the third, I think, that's really, really important and is a challenge to the sector and the industry, is for those who want clear action on climate change, issue bundling is something that will have to be avoided. And issue bundling is a term I created, which is basically where you have a sector that is arguing for clear action on one segment, and it bundles it with a whole host of other campaigns. Don't take a 70% winning coalition and reduce it to a 25% one. That is a surefire way to basically slow progress. And very much linked to that is understanding the language, the tone, and the politics of the thing. Because really what we've seen is a sector potentially have headwinds, some of its own making. And I think on the issue bundling and on tone and the politics, I think that's really, really critical. And our research basically shows that if you can focus minds on the exam question at hand, which is the need for clear climate change, or climate action, then you can bring voters with you.
Thanks, James. I think the touchstone that we know is that you've reinforced the very strong base of support I mean, exceptionally high on an issue basis and actually very high awareness, but also that there are some more difficult dynamics happening and some changing in the political landscape that we really need to kind of be very careful and thoughtful about how we navigate. So thank you for that. Carl, I want to turn to you around, just to come back and to sort of hone in, because you've done a lot of work around the kind of populist narratives in particular. What have you seen, particularly around net zero in the UK, Europe, but also beyond, where you're looking at it? And then I guess as a follow-up, because I think this is in a way, an elite issue, but on the populists, you may disagree with me. But where is the media role, and to a certain extent, the political elite picking up this idea that there is a backlash? So untangle that for us, and what are you seeing on the populist side?
So I think that the thing that happens when you go out and actually talk to people that vote for populist parties, populist politicians around Europe that are hostile to this agenda, is that you find that there's a lot more good faith than you actually might expect if you don't talk to these people. There are obviously cynical actors, there are cynical business interests, there is levels of corruption that are attacking this agenda, but there's also a lot of worry and a lot of concern about various climate policies. And it's great that 70% of people think that greenhouse gases are bad and they want urgent action to fix it. But when you actually start talking to people about, well, what does that mean for my job, my community, my home, then that becomes a worry for them. And that's where the populist right has seen an opportunity and is taking advantage of that, because they can build a narrative. And some of that narrative is well placed, especially when what they hear from the climate movement and climate advocates all around the world is essentially a kind of blithe, like, we're not going to leave anyone behind. That's, just transition, blah, blah. And you put yourself in those people's shoes, and it sounds like, every podcast I listen to at the moment has some AI guy on it who's saying, we're going to destroy all the jobs, but it's fine because in a utilitarian sense, in the future, we're all going to have more and it's going to be great and, no one should worry. And that's exactly what the climate movement sounds like to a lot of people. So I think there's like a way of coming back to like feeling more empathy and talking to these people in a more realistic sense about what the transition means for them, that would kind of close off some of these political opportunities for people, because there is a kind of losing narrative out there at the moment about when you get down to the nitty-gritty, like how is this going to change my life? And that's not to say every climate policy is controversial either. There are a ton of, even heat pumps in Germany were controversial, but they did them in France and it wasn't. So it depends on local circumstances and things like that, what the far right chooses to elevate and why. But basically, I think that is avoiding those kind of narratives where people just hear message in one ear, like I'm being messaged to by one person, but I'm also being messaged to by the other. And that's where people get frustrated and they just throw their hands up in the air and feel very frustrated and feel very annoyed at everybody. Thanks,
Carl. And I want to come back also on the kind of the role of the media. I don't know if you want to address that now or we pick it up. I mean, you say that people, where are people getting their messages from when you're talking about the hearing, certain things from what are the sources? And some of what James was talking about as well was that this kind of uncertainty around what is a touchstone of what's true. And
I'm laughing because the kind of existential crisis in the media is that no one's actually listening to us ever and we don't matter anymore. They get it direct from politicians, essentially. They're hearing these messages. I've been in, rural Spain talking to farmers who are living through drought, and they're all turning to vote for Vox. And I said, how are you getting your information? And they pulled up their phones and said, TikTok. They get TikTok straight from Vox. They've mastered social media, and that's how they're talking to these people. So those messages are not necessarily coming through us. Obviously, some media project those messages. All we can do as, speaking for myself as a reporter, all I can do is try and find where the good faith arguments are and boil that down and go out and report on what people feel. And so that's my job. That's how I interpret my role.
Thanks, Carl. And Stencho, I'm going to turn to you to pick up. I mean, you have been at the heart of politics and policy making. You have worked in an environment that has certainly seen fragmentation, populism, and so on. So you have really been there and lived it. But how do we create consensus? How do we build the solutions? And to a certain extent, how do we navigate this current context that we're in?
First of all, thanks a lot. And also, I was writing everything that you said. Yeah, in general, people want also the government to take action, right? And I think that is a call that we also, as politicians, people depend on us to solve these big problems that they know are out there and that they cannot always solve themselves. But first of all, what struck me is that this is also really a European and Western discussion that we're having here now, with a bit of the doom and gloom around this agenda. So I work with the World Resources Institute, so we work from China to Colombia and a lot of the countries in between. And I think if you go to China, if you go to Southeast Asia, if you go to India, if you go to Africa, I was just speaking to Mr. Mohammed from Kenya, they see this energy transition as the development path for their economy. And so it is also very much, I think, a challenge for our part of the world. And it's sometimes good to be aware of the fact that others are marching ahead at full speed. And they're also facing, I think, as this continent, a choice whether we're going to focus on that economy of the future. And it's not easy, right? It's not easy. Let's not pretend to say it's easy. But are we going to do that, or are we slump back and continue this dependence on this old model? We all know how that has served us. Second remark is connected to that. I think in Europe, if we do what we did, we'll get what we got. And that was a slow erosion, I think, step by step, of the support. And why? Because I think two elements. One very critical element is that, of course, the rule-based world that Europe built its open economy on, it's changed. And we would not have liked it to change, but it has. And it changes some circumstances. It changes some things that are very, very top of mind of voters, of people that take decisions. The fact that we have a war in Ukraine, that we see the threat of Russia, the NATO summit is currently happening in The Hague. People think about defense. Governments have to think about defense. It's not because they would like or find climate less important, but this has come to the top of an agenda, and I think it's important that we also realize that. It may mean that people actually still feel exactly the same about the need to take urgent action for climate change, but that this war, this change also in the situation of America, our allies are no longer those that we could always rely on. Of course, these are very urgent issues, and we have to make sure that we take that into account. Third thing, I think we have to continue to speak about climate, and we have to connect it to the other agendas. And I don't see that as issue bundling, because if you talk about, and I'm sure there's issue bundling that would be negative, right? So I'm not negating your research, but I'm thinking we know that the biggest impulse for European transition to renewable energies and more energy efficiencies, etc., was the climate crisis induced by Putin's actions. Do we really want to continue to be dependent on importing those fossil fuels, or do we invest in our own economy, in making the investments that are needed to make sure that indeed all people can form part of that? Because there, I think we do have, and that's, I think, maybe what you refer to, we do have an obligation to learn from the steps that we take in this transition. This is something massively difficult that we're trying to do. So, of course, we're going to make mistakes. And let's make sure that we own up for those mistakes and that we learn from them and we design the next policy package better. And to just give an example, when I was Minister for the Environment of the Netherlands, I was responsible for transport decarbonization. And so as part of the very first climate agreement in the Netherlands ever, we said, this is how many megatons the Netherlands will have to decarbonize to meet the Paris Agreement. And so we divided it over different ministries, and I was becoming responsible for the decarbonization in the transport sector. I had to chase megatons through policy initiatives. And of course, we thought it has to be as cheap as possible, because nobody likes costs for climate change policy, so let's make it as cheap as possible. So we talked to a lot of people, put together a package that was the biggest bang for the buck. Send it, just before Christmas, we sent it to Parliament, and we crashed under the Christmas tree, and then we came back from our recess, and one of the popular newspapers had just shredded it to pieces. Why? Because they were against climate? No. But there was I think, 0.5 cent increase in diesel taxes in that package, because we thought it's a double-edged sword, so very efficient from a macroeconomic perspective. But people that had lower salaries said, all of that is very nice, but you're giving subsidies to somebody who can afford a Tesla. Why would they need a government subsidy to make the transition to electricity, to electric vehicles? Whereas that kind of car will never be affordable for me. So why are we subsidizing rich people? And I thought, actually, they're right. And so we took back the package, we redesigned it. We did not lessen the ambition. The ambition was as high as it was. But we turned the package around, we changed it, so we put a cap on the kind of car that you could get a subsidy for, because indeed, if you can afford a Tesla, you don't need that subsidy. But if you're looking into that intermediate category, you're thinking, well, can I not? Then that actually may be effective and efficient. And those are the cars also that will then go on to the second-hand market. And in that second-hand market, people will feel that's the car that I might buy in a couple of years' time. So we put in place also a subsidy for a second-hand electric vehicle. There were not many on the market at the time that we put the incentive there, but people knew this is not just about them, this may also be about me, because I also want to feel good about driving a clean car. I also want to feel good about having solar panels. I want to be a part of this transition. I also want the world to be a better place. But I cannot just afford all of that. So I think that in the how we design our policies, we have to learn from the first steps that we took, and we have to make sure that we indeed also in practice make sure that people feel that this is for them, that they can get a more comfortable house, that they can get a lower energy bill, not just in theory, but also in practice, so meeting people where they are. And I think that is something that we can do better. And I just want to be honest about that too. And I hope that we can all come together to maintain that ambition and to find those policy incentives that deliver that for those people that want the government to take action, that also want climate policy to be taken, that we make sure we do it in a way that they can also follow and that they can be part of this transition. And I think there we have a challenge ahead of us.
Stencha, thank you. I think you've beautifully demonstrated Nick's point this morning about humility and honesty in when we do get things wrong, and really to think through the distribution and the communication and get beyond, kind of talking to people in technocratic terms, but also making policy decisions that are actually quite technocratic that may actually not work for people. So that was a fantastic example, and thank you for sharing that. Did you want to come back in?
Can I just say one more thing? Because I think we also have to help people understand how much progress we have made, right? Yeah. I think the fact that the price of solar panels has come down, I think since the 1970s by 99.9%, right, shows that we can make this transition. I think Catherine or Jennifer mentioned that. The progress that we're making, we are making massive steps, and investing does work. I mean, WRI just, I think yesterday released, or today released a report about adaptation, for example. Right? We often think of adaptation as a cost. No, there's research out there on the basis of over 300 projects shows that investing $1 in adaptation leverages $10 in the economy. So let's also tell the good stories. Let's tell about the fact that we are making progress, not easy everywhere, it's not cost less, but they're good stories. It's good to invest. That's why the rest of the world thinks like, this is brilliant, let's make this the basis of our economy.
Absolutely. Thank you for rounding that out. I would have loved to ask the panel a follow-up, but I'm aware that we are now standing or sitting between the audience and their own mini heat wave and a cup of tea and a chat. So we're going to wrap it up, but I was going to say, I think we are at London Climate Action Week, and we are going out at Piccadilly Circus and around the Westfield with the message around don't tell me climate action isn't happening. And I think that reinforces two things, which is we do need to talk to people about it. We have this incredible level of public support that we cannot rely on forever that could be at risk from these various different factors, but also that people want to know and they need to know to avoid the kind of spiral of silence and we need to act on that political support that we have. So thank you very much to James, Carl, Stencher for joining us at State of Climate Politics Forum today.